Hello, and welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of sports. And you know what time it is. We're going to continue our conference breakdowns. Next up, we got the SEC. It's been long awaited. Tim, are you ready to go?
Let's run it.
Let's do it. Let's not waste any time getting into the first team, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Despite all the drama going on with Bama and Brandon Miller, they've kept on winning as one of the best teams in the country. Miller leads that team as the primary scorer on one of the highest scoring offenses in the country at a little under 83 points per game. Ken Palm loves their defense even more, though, because they're ranked third in adjusted defensive efficiency in the country. They also clean up the glass, snatching the most rebounds in the SEC by a very wide margin. And this team can step up to any team in the country at any time, and they're ready, they're focused, and they're ready to go for the NCAA tournament.
The Crimson Tide, they're very fast paced, guard heavy offense, obviously accentuated by the elite defense that you mentioned. But they have certainly been no short of distractions this year due to all of the things surrounding their team, Brandon Miller, and all of that. It's been a rather wild ride. But Brandon Miller has been nothing short of incredible, averaging just short of 20 points per game as a freshman. He's a clear lock for a top 5, top 3 pick, realistically. He's been incredible. And they do have a very good balance of offense and defense, which is why they've played so well during this year. But it's kind of it's kind of hard to say that they haven't necessarily succumbed to a bit of the distractions lately, because they haven't quite seemed like the dominant team against some of these teams lately. But they obviously are still playing incredible basketball. But some of their weaknesses is with as fast of a pace as they do play, they turn the ball over a lot. Just over 14 turnovers per game. And I think part of that is also how many freshmen they run. They run 4 freshmen with significant minutes, which can lead to a lot of inexperience, even though most of them have answered the call well throughout most points of the season.
You know, it's crazy how they're challenging for the number 1 overall seed in the country, and they're a football school. But that's neither here nor there. This year, they're playing really, really good basketball.
Absolutely.
But the next team we have is Texas A&M, and you can make an argument that they're the hottest team in this conference. They've won 8 of their last 9, including wins against Tennessee and Alabama. They're also 4-0 against ranked teams this year, which really helps your case. Their strength comes from the free throw line. They shoot 76% from the stripe as a team, which leads the SEC.
They're very balanced between offense and defense, and they do a good job of keeping teams honest on both ends of the floor. Wade Taylor leading the charge with just over 16 points per game. And like you said, their free throw percentage is very, very solid for them, and that's the difference in a lot of games, especially against their in their game against Alabama.
Yeah, I knew
recently.
You'd love that. I knew you'd love their free throw percentage.
When they made 27 out of 28 free throws to ice that game, that is so important, and that's going to keep you in basically almost every game that you play. So you really can't count them out just about ever. They do turn the ball over a decent amount, but their main issue offensively is whether or not they're going to get much offensive production outside of Wade Taylor. Sometimes that can be spotty on who's going to step up outside of him.
The next team we have is Kentucky, who's had a little bit of a down year compared to the past few years of Kentucky basketball. Oscar Tshiebwe is still a monster on the glass and on the block. We already knew that one. But my favorite player to watch on this team is Illinois State transfer Antonio Reeves. I call him Redbird Reeves. He pretty much carried that program for the last few years. He transferred to Kentucky, and he's kept up the scoring. He's their second option, and when he gets hot, he absolutely lights it up. Love watching that guy play.
Kentucky has been up and down for, their standards, and there's been a lot of talk about them and whether or not they were going to find their way into the tournament. They've been playing better as of lately and find themselves on the right side of things. And a big help of that was that season sweep of Tennessee. That was obviously very, very solid for them. Oscar Tshiebwe, like you said, is still playing at a very high level, not quite the National Player of the Year level that we saw out of him last year. I think part of that was to do with him recovering from an injury that he had coming into the season. He's still been continuing to try to work up to his 100% form. But they shoot the ball from 3 pretty well as a team, averaging just short of 36% from deep. But they're not the best defensively. In most games they've lost have come from teams having above average games offensively, outside of basically 2 of their losses, one of them to UCLA early in the season and Vanderbilt more recently.
They're definitely more of an offensive minded team, but when they're shooting and they're scoring, it's hard to
tough to
stop.
stop.
This next team, I have a little bit more info on. Shout out to my Mizzou insider, the man, the myth, the legend, Ryan Walterman. Love that guy. He armed me with tons of knowledge about the Mizzou Tigers. So let's get into it. This team is led by the do it all Kobe Brown, but don't sleep on Demoy Hodge. When Hodge gets hot and Mizzou has that second option, they rarely lose. Demoy shots he makes, Demoy the Tigers win. Mizzou also lives and dies by the three ball on offense as they shoot 36% from 3-point range. And an off shooting night could mean trouble. And on the defensive side of the ball, they're a really, really weird team because it seems like every time they go up and down the floor, they're either taking it the other way with a steal or giving up a bucket. They force a lot of turnovers, mainly via that steal with the man, the myth, the legend, Demoy. The more steals they get, the more points they score in transition. What a crazy concept.
He's got quite an effect on this team. I mean, the Tigers, they're a very guard heavy team with a very good offense, but as you kind of mentioned, they don't defend that well, at least statistically. Those steals are great, but like you said, they're kind of all or nothing on defense. Kobe Brown has been incredible for this year. Demoy Hodge, obviously, as that second option, is absolutely massive for them when he gets going. But the question is whether he's on or off and how that accentuates that team. They are a pretty deep team with balanced scoring from around the floor. They have 7 guys that average 7.5 points per game or more. Despite their not great offense or defensive efficiency numbers, they do get a lot of steals, like you mentioned, averaging just over 10.5 steals per game as a team. But the thing with them is they trade offense for defense, and that can really come back to bite you in the butt against teams that, score the ball really well, or if they have a particularly good defensive game and knock one of Missouri's guys, off their mark, it can be tough to dig out of that hole.
Yeah, I see Mizzou as a very boom or bust team that can either keep your ship afloat and take you to great places or sink your ship 5 minutes into the journey.
Whether or not what kind of team you're going to see, which version coming into both the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament will determine how far they go.
Next up, we have Tennessee, who might have the best defense in the entire country, which, not an exaggeration. They're third nationally in opponent points per game, first in opponent field goal percentage and 3-point percentage. So they're very good at stopping teams shooting. But they lost Sakai Ziegler, and that is absolutely a huge blow. And it's a hit to arguably the leader and the best player on the Volunteers. And it's just not a great look for a team that may have already peaked.
I agree. I mean, the last month or so has not been kind to them. Despite them being a very good team, their trajectory does kind of seem to be pointed downwards. Losing Sakai Ziegler to that torn ACL really, really hurts them, like you mentioned, and we hope that he recovers from that fully. But that definitely leaves a big hole in their team because, I mean, he averages over 10.5 points per game, 2 steals per game. And obviously, just how much of an effect he has on that defense because he was a defensive player of the year semifinalist before going down. So
that's not a hole that you can
just
fix. You can't just
there's not another guy they have in the wings just step up and take that kind of role, both offensively and defensively, and just being a leader on that team. But the big issue for them is they don't score the ball that much, and that's largely because they don't really have a guy that they can just get to go score for them when they need to. Pretty much most of their scores on the team are kind of like a needs to get set up by somebody kind of scorer. And that has caused them to really struggle to score sometimes against defenses that have more intense ball pressure, kind of like what they do to other teams.
Tim, at one point, Vanderbilt was 10-12. And then they ripped off 8 of 9 and are red hot at the right time. They're ready to crash the party and steal a bid. They've made a massive leap up the SEC standings and have a lot of momentum going into the SEC tournament. It also helps that it's right in their backyard. The SEC tournament is in Nashville, so it's almost like they're playing home games. They have a pretty big home court advantage. They also turn the ball over the least in the conference. So if you want an SEC dark horse, Vanderbilt's your team.
They have been playing a lot better as of lately. And, we're definitely not quite used to talking about Vanderbilt in college basketball, but here we are regardless. Along the way in this surge that they've had, they've upset the likes of Tennessee and Kentucky, which have both, led them to being sort of vaulted onto the scene.
Well, Tim, the real upsets were the friends we made along the way.
Usually those aren't upsets, but if they're positive upsets, I guess.
Exactly. See,
Um,
you know what I mean? It's
sure.
all about the
But
journey, Tim.
that's for sure. And they've had quite a journey. They're pretty decent 3-point shooters as a team, and they do handle the ball pretty well, like you mentioned with the turnovers. But other than that, they don't have a ton going for them statistically. Their defense struggles mightily at times. And exhibit A of that is the 101-44 manhandling that they received at Alabama at the end of January. But since then has
But they've
really
been a
been when they
different
turned it
team since
on.
the end of
Yes.
January.
And
So
that was really that turnaround point for them. But you can see that that can happen at times if you catch them on, a bad day. For them, they don't shoot free throws that well, which, obviously we've talked about how important that is for holding on to leads in close games. Only
hammer,
shooting
free
71% from the
throws.
charity stripe.
Eh.
You
Does the
know, I
team shoot
mean,
free throws well? We're just gonna take
I'm
that
gonna
dead
keep
horse and
mentioning it
and
if
kick it. Just kick it
I'm
right in the
gonna keep
face.
mentioning it. But yeah, no, they have been playing a lot better as of lately. And it's gonna be really interesting to see what, version of them if they can continue this hot streak going into the SEC tournament.
The next team we have is Auburn, who has essentially had two separate seasons. The first one, they started 16-3, and since then they've been in free fall. They've gone 4-8, and their offense is really boom or bust as well. They either show up and score 80 to 90, or they just don't show up at all and score 50 to 60. Auburn's just a really confusing team, but they fall right inside the bubble as of right now. Their most recent win against Tennessee definitely helps, but they do carry a tad bit of momentum going into the SEC tournament, but it's still not quite enough. They're going to need a little bit more.
Yeah, they're a team that definitely shows that they can compete at the highest level in the SEC. It's just they're so inconsistent. They're a team that can battle with anybody, but they've struggled with on and off performances, especially in the second half of the year. They've been the victim of a lot of close games, which has really added to their loss count. And I kind of think that does speak to their inability to close out games sometimes. Defensively, they've done pretty well to hold down some of the better offenses in the SEC, including Alabama, except for when it's just off. They're either on or they're off, and that's what you mentioned. That's really difficult.
Like a light switch.
They really are. But they're not a great shooting team, and sometimes down the stretch they've resorted to sort of like one-on-one ball a lot. In some of their close games, you saw that in that overtime loss to Alabama. And they do turn over the ball a decent amount. In terms of shooting, they're only shoot 70% from the line and over 31% from three. So it's like they don't have a ton going for them there either. It's just whether or not you're going to see the world beating Auburn, or if you're going to see just kind of the very middle of the pack SEC team.
Next team we got is Florida, and I just feel like expectations were a lot higher for them, and they just haven't lived up to it. But
Not
they
quite.
figured a way to stay afloat right at 500, given the season that they've had. Their offense and defense runs through Colin Castleton. He dominates both the blocks and the boards, and he's the engine that makes Florida go. It's not likely, but in this stage of March, any team can get hot and steal a bid. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. Nothing is impossible because this is March, and forget everything we thought we knew.
You said it best. Nothing is impossible, but the Gators do find themselves on the outside looking in. There's no doubt about that. And they are going to need one hell of a run in this SEC tournament to find themselves with a bid to the NCAA tournament. Colin Castleton, obviously, as you mentioned, is the heart and soul for this team. And, outside of that, it's kind of like who's going to step up in any given day. They're yet another team with a decent defense. Oh boy. But struggles to find
Words.
scoring.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
defense is
yeah.
kind of just
Words,
about the
words. Yeah,
only
yeah, yeah.
only thing they do well. Their downfall this year has been putting offense together with defense. They either score pretty well or hold teams to low point totals, not both. They're not a great shooting team outside of Colin Castleton, and they don't have very many consistent scoring options, which has really been their downfall when Colin isn't, being a world beater for them.
Mississippi State, they started their season 11-0, and then once SEC play started, quick 180, flip it right around,
Yikes.
and they lost 8 of their next to 9. 10 of their 11 total losses are in conference play, which is not very inspiring going into the SEC tournament. They're generally not a very good scoring team, and they're also brutal from the free throw line. They shoot under 65%.
Oh
Oh
God,
dear.
those numbers just pain me.
But what Mississippi State does do well is lock down teams, and their defense can be absolutely suffocating at times. So when their defense is on, then Mississippi State has a chance to win. But until they score more and knock down more free throws,
Kind of on the flip side from what you mentioned, I mean, they did have that obviously really rough stretch in the middle of the year, but other than that, they've been a decently solid team. Since January, they've won 8 of their last 11, and they do have themselves vying for an NCAA tournament spot. But their difficulties are obviously with that offense. They
I
have a
just see them as
fantastic
a really
defense.
volatile team
Yes,
that,
absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of teams like that here, but they are probably the most hit or miss, with a majority of miss when they come to shooting the ball. As you mentioned, they're kind of a god awful shooting team. They shoot, obviously the free throw line is bad enough, but they shoot just over 27% from three. So clearly they're
yeah.
not much better from farther out. And they only have one player that averages more than 10 points per game, and that's Tolu Smith. So that defense really is, what keeps them in games. But if they're not going to score the ball, you're not going to win as many games in a row as it takes to make a deep run in either the SEC tournament or in the NCAA tournament if they do find themselves in it.
Basketball, if you don't put the ball in the basket, you're going to lose the game.
That
Crazy.
is kind of
I
how it
know.
works. And you do have
That's
to score more than the other team.
that's absolutely nuts. Arkansas is another team that started the year red hot at 11-1, and then they've fallen into various pitfalls where they lose multiple games and they just can't quite figure it out. Recently, they've been falling again with 3 straight losses entering the tournament. Granted, those losses are against Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky.
They
So,
have
like,
had a tough 3 games. So
yeah, like pump the
definitely not the
brakes a little
stretch
bit. We're
that you
not
want coming into the SEC
yeah,
tournament,
like
though.
we're not panicking about them, but it's
No.
just not the direction that you
It would
want to
have been
trend.
more, it'd be more reinforcing if they had managed to get a win or two out of those
Yes,
3.
completely agree. They're a really guard heavy team that has been hit by the injury bug at various points of the season, but they're still in a position for an at large bid despite those rough patches.
Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of talent last year, and with that talent, they had some pretty high expectations going into this year, but they just haven't quite matched up with that. The injuries obviously have been iffy for them, as you mentioned. They do defend well and cause a lot of turnovers. They average 8.4 steals per game, and they actually have a good amount of blocks, which you don't necessarily see in a lot of teams, averaging 5.2 blocks per game as a team. But they do turn over the ball quite a bit, averaging almost 13 turnovers per game, and they do not shoot it well from the free throw line. Again, I will say it about 50 times while going over all of these teams, but obviously that's really important. They shoot just 69% as a team, and their three-point shooting is really average at best, so they struggle to match up offensively with a lot of the top-tier defenses in the SEC.
Oh boy, those were a lot of teams to cover because the SEC has a lot of them that could potentially make the tournament. But with that being said, we're going to pick an SEC tournament winner. Tim, you'll go first. Who you got?
Oh, boy. I don't want to say this is a tough one because I'm pretty sure I've said that in literally every single conference overview. But none of this is easy. For
Of
me,
course it's
obviously,
not. We thought the Sun Belt was a shoo-in, and then Marshall gets knocked out, so that went completely out the window. So
yeah,
what do we
exactly.
know? We're just
Yeah,
trying our best.
for me, I know a lot of people are very high on Alabama. I obviously they're an incredible team, but I do kind of sense a slip up with sort of the semi shaky trajectory they've had to
Mm-hmm.
end the season. I really like the way that Texas A&M has been playing lately. I think they're going to keep up that momentum, and make a run through the SEC tournament. They've got the guys to score the ball. That free throw shooting is so super key. In a lot of these close games, and I think they have all the ingredients to make the recipe for winning a lot of these close, grinded out tournament games.
Yeah, Tim, I've been like straight chalk for the last few tournament predictions that we've done. So I think it's my time.
Pull one out in the hat.
I think it's time to shake it up a little bit because all it takes for a team.
Vandy.
Hold the phone. All it takes is for a team to
Mhm.
get hot at just the right time. I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I have Mizzou. Mizzou
Okay,
has all the
they've
elements
got
that
the
you look
offense.
for. good guard play, good shooting, and they force a lot of turnovers. So if the ball gets rolling, I think Kobe Brown and Demoy, they play, the better they get, and Demoy, they win games, and Demoy, they're gonna win the SEC tournament. Let's go,
The
Mizzou!
more you say it, the less I like it.
I was waiting for it.
But they are an incredible offensive team, and if they're able to put enough stops together, they can beat literally anybody in this conference. So that I do not find that to be a crazy pick. Obviously, we know our buddy Ryan will love that one.
I know you're absolutely going to love it, but that's all we got for our SEC breakdown. We've run through most of the other major conferences in college basketball. So if you haven't watched those, go watch those and then come back here and watch our other content. We have NFL, NBA, and so much more coming up in the future. It is almost March. It is almost time for Selection Sunday and the tournament. It's right around the corner. I can feel the energy in the air, and I am absolutely hyped. I can't wait. If you want more from us, like and subscribe. And until next time, we out. Peace. Demoy, I say stuff. Demoy, the joke gets old.
Tomoy, I want to strangle you.